The mayor came for a ribbon cutting. I came with a 1934 water control contract. I walked down to my dock at sunrise and found a luxury floating restaurant sitting in the middle of my private lake. Brass rails, champagne tables, cameras, even a grand opening banner, all paid for by an HOA that had no right to touch my land. Vivian Cross smiled and said the water belonged to the community now. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten her. I went home for the paperwork she never bothered to read. Stay with me and subscribe if you believe a quiet man with a deed can still shake the whole room. At sunrise, I stood on my private dock with my boots on the same boards my father and I had replaced 20 years earlier, staring at a restaurant that had no right to exist. It floated in the middle of Mercer Lake like a polished insult. White canvas roofs snapped in the morning breeze. Brass railings caught the first light. Champagne tables lined the deck, where trout used to break the surface in clean little rings. Caterers moved back and forth in black vests, carrying crates of glassware, silver trays, and boxes marked grand opening. Silver pine floating dining. My lake, my dock, my family's water. And 6 hours from now, according to the banner tied across the entrance ramp, the Silver Pine Ridge HOA planned to celebrate. I didn't move at first. I just listened. Generators hummed from the service barge. A chef shouted about ice. Someone tested a microphone and sent a sharp squeal rolling across the water. It cut straight through the quiet that used to belong to Emily and me. For 30 years, my wife and I had ended our evenings here. Same dock, same mountain line, same black water turning copper under the sunset. After cancer took her, I built her memorial garden under the cottonwood near the shore. Wild lupine, sage, and the yellow flowers she loved because they came back stubborn after winter. Now a loading ramp had been dragged less than 20 yards from that garden. Mr. Mercer. Vivian Cross called my name from the floating platform as if she had invited me. She stood near the rail in a cream suit that looked too clean for lake country, one hand wrapped around a clipboard, the other around a paper coffee cup. Behind her, 2 workers were polishing brass posts like they were preparing for a wedding instead of a trespass. She smiled down at me. Beautiful morning, isn't it? I looked at the floating restaurant, then at her. Get it off my lake. Her smile didn't break. Vivian had been president of Silver Pine Ridge HOA for less than a year, but she already carried herself like the county had been handed to her with a ribbon around it. That's exactly the attitude that made this necessary, she said. The board found the old access clause, shared water use 1930s language. Our attorney reviewed it. Mercer Lake is community water now. I felt my jaw tighten. No, I said. It isn't. She stepped closer to the rail, enjoying the height difference. Caleb, you can keep repeating that, but paper beats sentiment. This lake has been underused for decades. Silver Pine residents deserve access to the natural assets that increase their property values. Natural assets. That was what she called the place where I scattered my wife's ashes. I pointed toward the shore. That memorial garden is not part of your project. That dock is not part of your project. This water is not part of your project. Vivian glanced toward the cottonwood and gave a small, bored sigh. Oh, the garden. She said it softly, but the workers nearby still heard her. I understand grief makes people territorial, but your wife's little sunset memories cannot stop community progress forever. For a second, the whole lake went silent inside me. The generators still ran, staff still moved, a gull called from somewhere over the far bank, but all I could hear was Emily's voice from the last week of her life, thin but steady, asking me to promise this place would stay peaceful. I had promised. Vivian watched my face, waiting for me to explode. That was what people like her wanted. A raised voice, a threat, One bad sentence she could record and turn into evidence, so I gave her nothing. I looked past the restaurant, past the brass and canvas, and rented elegance, toward the line of old cottonwoods on the west bank. Hidden under the shadows was a concrete spillway tower most people mistook for an abandoned pump house. Beyond that, half buried in grass and thyme, sat the iron wheel my father had told me never to touch unless I understood exactly what it controlled. Vivian followed my gaze and frowned. "What are you looking at?" I turned back to her. "You built this whole thing on my water," I said. "But did you ever ask who controls the dam?" Her smile faltered for the first time. "Only a little," but I saw it. Behind her, the opening banner snapped in the wind. 6 hours until the mayor arrived. 6 hours until cameras rolled. 6 hours until Vivian Cross showed the whole county what she thought she had taken from me. I slid my hands into my jacket pockets and stepped off the dock. "Enjoy your morning, Vivian," I said. She laughed once. "You're walking away?" "No," I said, looking back at the restaurant sitting bright and proud on stolen water. "I'm getting my paperwork." And for the first time since sunrise, the anger in my chest went cold enough to think clearly. 6 months earlier, Vivian Cross had arrived at my ranch in the same white SUV, driving too fast over gravel my family had laid before Silver Pine Ridge was even a developer's sketch. I was repairing a fence near the north pasture when I heard her tires bite into the road. She stepped out wearing a cream coat, sunglasses, and that polished real estate smile people use when they already decided your answer does not matter. "Caleb Mercer?" she called. I wiped my hands on a rag. "You found him." She did not introduce herself like a neighbor. She held up a clipboard like a badge. "Vivian Cross, president of Silver Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. We're conducting a shoreline compliance review." I looked past her toward the ridge, where the new subdivision roofs sat in neat rows beyond my fence line. "Your HOA is over there. Our community borders this watershed," she said. "That gives us standing." That was the first lie. She opened a folder and pulled out a glossy survey map. Fresh ink, bright boundary lines. My lake was shaded pale blue, labeled Shared Water Access Zone. The words sat right across the middle of Mercer Lake like someone had dragged a knife through it. "This old access clause," Vivian said, tapping the paper with one manicured nail, "dates back to the 1930s. It grants community access to the water feature, now serving Silver Pine Ridge." I almost laughed, but her eyes told me she was not confused. She was testing me. "That clause was for emergency livestock watering during drought years," I said. "It never gave anybody recreational access. It sure as hell never gave an HOA control." Her smile thinned. "You seem very certain." "I have the deed." I walked to my truck, opened the lockbox behind the seat, and pulled out the copy I kept there for exactly this kind of foolishness. 47 acres, recorded boundary, lake bed, shoreline, dam, spillway, and 50 feet beyond the far bank. My grandfather's name first, my father's after that, mine last. I handed it to her. Vivian glanced at the first page, then passed it back like old paper offended her. Frontier documents are often messy. Communities evolve. Uses change. A single private owner cannot freeze progress because he likes the view. The view is not the issue. "No," she said, looking over my shoulder toward the dock. "Control is." There it was, clean and honest for half a second. I stepped closer, enough that she had to stop looking at the lake and look at me. So, "Mrs. Cross, I don't belong to your HOA. My land is not inside your covenants. You have no easement, no lease, no shoreline rights, and no permission to be here." Her face did not change, but her hand tightened around the clipboard. "Mr. Mercer," she said, using that soft voice people use before they threaten you. Silver Pine Ridge homeowners paid premium prices for lake-adjacent property. They were promised access to natural amenities. If one holdout chooses to obstruct reasonable community use, the board has remedies. Then use them through a court. She tilted her head. Courts are slow. Development is not. The wind moved through the grass behind her. Down by the water, Emily's cottonwood dropped a few yellow leaves over the memorial stones. Vivian followed my eyes and seemed to understand exactly where to press. I heard about your wife, she said. I'm sorry. But grief does not create zoning immunity. I folded the deed slowly and put it back in its envelope. My hands wanted to shake. I did not let them. You need to leave. She smiled again, but this time it had no warmth at all. Old land can be reclassified when the community needs it. Then she walked back to her SUV, leaving 2 tire ruts across the edge of my pasture and 1 warning hanging in the air. That afternoon, I stood at the dock and watched the water settle back into silence. I told myself Vivian was just another HOA president drunk on letterhead. But by sunset, I knew better. She had not come to ask. She had come to mark the first line of a takeover. The first notice appeared 3 days later, taped crooked across my cabin door in bright orange paper. Shoreline vegetation violation. Silver Pine Ridge. HOA. I stood there with a coffee in one hand and a splitting maul in the other, reading a fine for wildflowers Emily had planted with her own hands. The notice said the growth near the East Bank created an unmanaged visual hazard affecting community enjoyment of the lake. $500, payable within 7 days. I took a picture before I peeled it off. The next morning, another notice showed up. Unauthorized dock structure. The dock my father built in 1988. The day after that, noise disturbance. Wood processing before approved community hours. I was splitting firewood on private ranch land half a mile from Vivian's nearest mailbox. By the end of the week, I had 6 notices and 0 patience. But I had learned something in 30 years of water system disputes. The first person to get angry usually becomes the story. The person with the records becomes the problem nobody can talk around. So I started a binder. Every notice went into a plastic sleeve. Every envelope got dated. Every trespass mark. Every tire rut. Every clipboard visit. Every phone call from a county office. All of it went into the same thick black folder on my kitchen table. Then the flags came. Red survey flags appeared along the south bank at dawn. Thin wire stems punched into the dirt near Emily's memorial garden. One was 6 feet from the cottonwood. Another leaned against the flat stone where I had carved her name. I pulled out my phone, filmed the whole line, and left them exactly where they were. At 9:20, a county truck rolled up my driveway. The inspector was a tired man named Louis Kramer, carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of somebody who already knew he had been dragged into nonsense. "Mr. Mercer?" he asked. "We received a complaint about unsafe shoreline modifications." "From Vivian Cross?" He looked at the flags, then at the lake. Complaint was anonymous. Of course it was. I walked him down to the water. He inspected the dock, the bank, the garden, the drainage culvert, and the old spillway fence. He found nothing. When he finished, he closed his clipboard with a snap. "Your property is cleaner than most county parks," he said, "but I'm required to note the visit. Has she been calling often?" He hesitated just long enough to answer without answering. "Keep your paperwork." That was the first official warning I got from someone not willing to say the quiet part out loud. 2 days later, a white sedan parked near my gate. 3 Silver Pine residents climbed out with phones raised, filming my fence, my pasture, and the roofline of my cabin like they were touring a crime scene. I walked down the gravel drive and stopped 10 feet from the gate. Can I help you? A woman in a red vest looked embarrassed. A man beside her didn't. Vivian said this access road may become community shoreline entry, he said. We're just documenting conditions. You're standing outside a locked private gate. He lifted his phone higher. You don't have to be hostile. That word landed exactly where Vivian wanted it to. Hostile, unstable, difficult, angry widower hoarding water. I pointed to the sign on the gate. Private property, no trespassing, recorded surveillance. Document that, I said. They left, but slowly, like people who wanted me to give them a better clip. That evening, I found a folded flyer in my mailbox. Not mailed. Hand-placed. Silver Pine Ridge Community Safety Alert. It warned residents about a non-cooperative lakefront occupant interfering with shared water access. It mentioned unsafe tools, aggressive behavior, and unpermitted structures. It did not mention my deed. It did not mention the property line. It did not mention that Vivian's HOA sat outside every recorded boundary that mattered. I read it twice, then added it to the binder. The next morning, Sheriff Nolan Hayes stopped by. Nolan had known my father. He did not waste words. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, and looked at the orange notices spread across my kitchen table. She's building a narrative, he said. I know. Then don't feed it. I'm not. He nodded toward the binder. Good. Because if this goes where I think it's going, calm paper will beat loud accusations. After he left, I walked back to the lake. The survey flags still trembled near Emily's garden. I wanted to rip every one of them out and throw them into Vivian's manicured driveway. Instead, I photographed them again, because the more she pushed, the more evidence she gave me. For 2 weeks, Vivian kept her distance. No SUV in my driveway, no new notices on the door, no residents filming at the gate. That kind of silence should have felt peaceful, but I had spent too many years around failing water systems to trust quiet pressure. Something was building behind the wall. I found it on a Thursday night with cold coffee beside my laptop and the binder open on the kitchen table. I had been searching county filings for Silver Pine Ridge when a sponsored development listing popped up under a commercial real estate site. Future Silver Pine Waterfront Dining District. The image froze me in my chair. It was my lake. Not a lake like mine. Mine. Same bend of shoreline. Same dock. Same cottonwood above Emily's memorial garden. Only the photo had been edited until it looked like a resort advertisement. Floating decks covered the West Cove. String lights hung over the water. Guest slips lined the bank where my father used to launch his old aluminum boat. Then I saw the caption under the oak, Future Community Gathering Shade. I read it 3 times before the anger landed. Emily's memorial tree had been turned into a sales feature. The listing described the property as underutilized lakefront, positioned for responsible community development. It said Silver Pine Ridge HOA was seeking qualified partners for a private dining and event concept. It promised secured water access through historical easement review. Secured. That word told me Vivian was already selling certainty she did not have. I printed every page. Renderings, contact forms, investor packet preview. The name at the bottom was not Vivian's. It was Lakeshore Community Ventures, a company I had never heard of. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting across from Dana Whitfield in her office downtown. Dana was the kind of attorney who did not waste words or decorate bad news. She had silver hair, sharp eyes, and a desk that looked like every paper on it could win a fight. She read the listing without speaking. Then she read Vivian's notices. Then she read my deed. When she finished, she looked up. She has no jurisdiction over your land. I know that. No, Dana said. I mean none. Not weak jurisdiction. Not disputed jurisdiction. None. That should have felt good. It didn't. Then why does this feel like she's winning? Dana turned the investor packet toward me. Because she's not trying to prove ownership yet. She's trying to create the appearance of ownership before money changes hands. Once investors, contractors, and residents believe the HOA controls the lake, the lie starts acting like a fact. I looked at the glossy rendering. A white floating pavilion sat in the middle of my water like a polished wound. What do? We send a cease and desist, Dana said. Certified. To Vivian. To the HOA board. To the listed company. We demand they produce any deed, easement, lease, or recorded instrument giving them rights to the lake. And if they don't? Her mouth tightened. Then we learn whether this is arrogance or fraud. Back at the ranch, I found Wade Turner waiting near my gate in his dust-covered pickup. Wade was 78, a retired rancher whose family had run cattle east of our property since before I was born. He leaned out his window and held up a folded flyer. You seen this? He asked. It was the same development image, printed on heavy paper. Where'd you get it? Silver Pine mailbox kiosk. They're passing it around like it's already approved. Wade nodded toward the lake. Your dad would have locked the gate and called the sheriff. I called a lawyer. Wade smiled. Smarter. Then his face changed. Caleb, there's something else. Folks are saying investors came through last week. Vivian walked them right up to your south fence. Told them the lake access was handled. The air seemed to tighten around me. How many? 3 cars. Maybe 4. Suits. Nice shoes. Didn't look like hikers. I looked down the road toward Silver Pine Ridge. For the first time, the fight felt bigger than one HOA president with a clipboard. Vivian had gone past harassment. She had found buyers. That afternoon, Dana filed the cease and desist. I added the development packet to the binder, right behind the survey flags and orange notices. Then I wrote one sentence on a yellow sticky note and placed it on the front cover. If she is showing renderings to the public, who has already paid her? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 mornings after Dana sent the cease and desist, a black Range Rover stopped outside my wooden ranch gate. The man who stepped out did not look like a neighbor. He wore pressed slacks, city shoes, and the tired expression of somebody whose investment had just started smelling wrong. He held a roll of blueprints under one arm and a leather folder against his chest. Caleb Mercer? He called through the gate. That depends who's asking. Grant Ellis. I'm with Ellis Hospitality Group. He glanced at the private property sign, then at the lake visible through the pines. I think we need to talk before this gets worse. I unlocked the gate but did not invite him past the cattle guard. If Vivian Cross sent you, you're already standing too far in. He swallowed. That's what I'm afraid of. Grant unrolled the blueprints across the hood of his Range Rover. Wind pulled at the corners until he pinned them down with both hands. The drawings showed a floating restaurant designed to fit Mercer Lake like a glove. Service dock on the West Cove. Guest ramp near Emily's Cottonwood. Kitchen barge tucked behind the reeds. Emergency access road crossing my south pasture. I saw my land reduced to arrows, measurements, and profit zones. What is this? I asked, though I already knew. Silver Pine Lake Dining Pavilion, Grant said. Vivian told us the HOA secured access through a historical easement. She said you agreed to a shoreline lease after mediation. I never attended mediation. His face tightened. She collected a development deposit, he said. $75,000 from my group. Another 20 from a catering partner. Maybe more. We were told the property owner was difficult, but cooperative once the compensation package cleared. I stared at him. Compensation package? Grant opened the leather folder and handed me a stapled document. Lakefront Use Consent and Temporary Construction Access Agreement. My name was typed under owner. The property description was close enough to fool someone who had not read the deed. The last page carried my signature, except it wasn't mine. The C in Caleb looped wrong. The M in Mercer leaned too hard, and whoever wrote it used a middle initial I had not used since the Army stopped caring what was on my dog tags. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but my voice came out steady. Mr. Ellis, this is forged. He went pale in a way no actor could fake. You're sure? I've signed my name for 54 years. He looked back at the restaurant plans like they had become evidence instead of opportunity. Vivian said you were dragging your feet because of sentimental issues. She said the HOA had authority to execute temporary access if you refused. Vivian has no authority to approve a birdhouse on my land. Grant rubbed one hand over his mouth. I wired money to Lakeshore Community Ventures. That company is hers. His eyes snapped up. What? Registered 3 weeks before the listing went public. Donna found it yesterday. The road behind us stayed empty, but the air had changed. Grant was no longer an investor asking questions. He was a witness realizing he had been used. I need copies of everything, I said. Emails, transfers, contracts, text messages, anything with Vivian's name or that company's name on it. He hesitated. My lawyer will kill me if I hand over documents. Your lawyer will thank you if this keeps you from building on stolen land. That landed. Grant nodded once, opened his laptop on the hood, and started forwarding files to Dana's office while I stood beside him watching the progress bar crawl. Contract drafts, deposit receipts, renderings, investor deck. A message from Vivian promising owner signature secured, construction access cleared. Then he found the email that made both of us go quiet. Vivian had written Caleb Mercer is isolated and unlikely to litigate once mobilization begins. Proceed before opposition organizes. I read that sentence twice. Isolated. She had looked at my grief and built a business plan around it. Grant closed the laptop carefully. Mr. Mercer, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, I said. Be accurate. He looked toward the lake. What are you going to do, I gathered the forged agreement, slid it into a folder, and locked the gate between us. What began as HOA bullying, I said, just became fraud. That afternoon, Dana filed a formal fraud notice with the county recorder, the sheriff's office, and every investor address Grant could provide. By sundown, the binder on my kitchen table had a new section labeled forgery, and Vivian Cross still thought I was only defending a lake. The next morning, diesel engines woke the ranch before sunrise. I stepped onto the porch and saw work lights flickering through the pines down by the water. Not pickup headlights, construction lights, big ones, the kind mounted on trailers and aimed at a job site nobody had permission to start. By the time I reached the shore, 2 barges were already nosing into Mercer Lake. Steel cables lay coiled on the dock. A crane arm swung over the water, lowering sections of a floating platform toward the West Cove. Men in hard hats moved fast, not careless, but too fast for people who believed the paperwork was clean. Stop work, I called. A foreman turned from the ramp. He was broad-shouldered, sunburned, and tired around the eyes. His vest read, Rodriguez Marine Construction. You the neighbor? He asked. I'm the owner. That got his attention. He came down the ramp with a clipboard. Owner name on my packet is Caleb Mercer. That's me. His face tightened. Then why are you telling me to stop? Because I never hired you, never leased this water, and never signed construction access. He flipped through the packet and pulled out the same consent agreement Grant Ellis had shown me. Same forged signature, same fake middle initial. Attached behind it were environmental forms, temporary shoreline permits, and an access map routing equipment across my pasture. This came through Silver Pine Ridge HOA, Rodriguez said. We were told the owner signed under community development agreement. You were told wrong. Behind us, the crane beeped as another platform section swung over the lake. I pointed at it. If that touches my water, your company becomes part of a property dispute with documented fraud. Rodriguez raised a hand to his crew. Hold it! The crane stopped mid-air. For the first time that morning, the lake went quiet except for the idle rumble of engines. Then Vivian's white SUV came hard down the road, throwing gravel behind it like a warning. She stepped out before the dust settled, wearing dark glasses and a hard hat she had no business owning. Why is my construction stopped? She snapped. Rodriguez turned. Mrs. Cross, Mr. Mercer says he did not authorize access. Vivian looked at me like I was a contractor who had missed a deadline. Caleb, this delay is childish. This is trespass. No, she said, walking straight onto my dock. This is community development under historical water access rights. We have permits. You have forged paperwork. The word hit the crew harder than it hit her. Several workers looked down at their boots. One pulled out his phone. Vivian gave a thin laugh. That accusation has already been referred to council. Your signature issue is an administrative inconsistency. Administrative inconsistency? I held up the copy from my binder. That is my name on a document I never saw. And your refusal to cooperate created emergency authority for the HOA to proceed. Rodriguez stared at her. Ma'am? Emergency authority to build a restaurant? Vivian's jaw flashed tight. To preserve vested development rights. That was the moment I knew she had told so many lies she was starting to stack them like sandbags. I called Dana from the dock and put her on speaker. Dana, I said, Vivian Cross is on my property with the marine construction crew. Work has started despite the fraud notice. Dana did not raise her voice. Mrs. Cross, this is Dana Whitfield, counsel for Caleb Mercer. You are on notice that the deeded owner denies consent. Any further construction will increase civil liability. Vivian folded her arms. Your threats are noted. They are not threats. They are records. Rodriguez looked at his suspended platform, then at Vivian. I'm not dropping another section until my office reviews this. Vivian spun toward him. You are under contract, and I'm not losing my license over a bad signature. For one clean second, power shifted on that dock. Then Vivian took out her phone. Fine, I'll bring in a crew that understands timelines. She walked back to her SUV, but before she left, she pointed at me. You think paperwork will save you? It won't. By opening day, that restaurant will be on this lake, and you'll be standing on shore watching progress happen without you. She drove off. Rodriguez's crew packed slowly, uneasy now, leaving tire marks, cable scars, and one half-assembled section floating near my dock. I stood there looking at it, anger burning low and steady. I could fight her in court. Dana could file injunctions. The sheriff could document trespass. But Vivian was moving faster than ordinary procedure. And somewhere on this ranch, buried under old paper and family dust, I had a feeling there was a faster legal way to stop her. I just had to find it before she found another crew. The old ranch office sat behind the barn, a narrow room with one window, a roll-top desk, and a locked metal cabinet my father had treated like a family vault. I had not opened it since Emily died. Grief has a way of turning ordinary rooms into locked doors. That night, I carried a flashlight, a screwdriver, and the binder under my arm. The cabinet key was taped under the bottom drawer of the desk, exactly where Dad had kept it since I was 12. The lock turned hard. The hinges complained. Inside were tax maps, cattle records, dam inspections, and a stack of brown ledgers tied with cotton string. I started with the newest one and worked backward. By midnight, The floor was covered in paper. By 1:30, I found the first map. Mercer Private Dam and Water Control System. County File 1934-WC-17. The paper was thin and yellow, but the ink was clear. The drawing showed the lake, the West Bank spillway, 3 underground release culverts, and the small concrete tower under the cottonwoods. The same tower Vivian had ignored because it did not look expensive enough to matter. My hands stopped when I saw my grandfather's signature at the bottom. Then I found the contract. It was folded inside a leather folder, stamped with the county seal, and signed by 3 officials in 1934. My grandfather had agreed to maintain the private dam and controlled spillway system as part of a flood control arrangement for the valley below. In return, the county recognized his family's authority to inspect, lower, divert, or drain the lake when maintenance or safety required it. I read the key paragraph out loud because I needed to hear it. Property owner shall retain exclusive operational control over water levels, spillway gates, release channels, and drainage inspection zones. Exclusive operational control, not shared, not community, not subject to HOA interpretation. Exclusive. A second page listed prohibited obstructions, docks, platforms, anchored structures, or commercial improvements placed over any release path or inspection zone without written approval from the water control operator. I looked through the office window toward the dark lake. Vivian had built her dream directly over the system my family had been authorized to operate for 90 years. At 6:15 the next morning, I was waiting outside the county engineering office with the folder in my truck and no sleep in my eyes. Owen Bradley came in carrying a thermos and stopped when he saw the seal on the contract. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "My father's cabinet." He took me into a conference room. For 40 minutes, he compared the contract against scanned county archives. He checked the file number. He checked the old plat. He checked a maintenance log from 1968 with my father's name written in blue ink. Then he sat back. "Mr. Mercer," he said, quieter now, "this is still valid." I did not speak. He turned the map toward me and tapped the West Cove. "And this area here, where the restaurant is anchored? That is not just lake surface. That is the spillway inspection zone. If the structure interferes with maintenance, you have authority to lower the lake to inspect the system." "Legally?" "Legally. With notice. The county would want to witness it. We'd document flow rates, downstream safety, gate condition, all of that. But yes." The room felt too still. I thought of Vivian's smile, her forged signature, her words about Emily's garden, her restaurant floating bright on water she did not understand. "What do I file?" I asked. Owen pulled a form from a drawer. "Routine flood control inspection notice. How long does it take to approve? For an existing private dam contract?" He looked at the old seal again. "If the file is clean, same day." By noon, Dana had copies. Sheriff Nolan Hayes had copies. Owen opened a county maintenance file and scheduled an official inspection for the morning of Vivian's grand opening. At 3 o'clock, Wade Turner came by the ranch after I called him. He stood beside the old spillway wheel, ran his palm over the rusted iron, and smiled like a boy remembering thunder. "Your dad used to open this every few years," Wade said. "Dropped the lake fast enough to scare the geese. Think it still works?" Wade glanced at the restaurant pieces floating near the cove. "Caleb," he said, "your family built things to last." That evening, I oiled the wheel and marked the inspection path with county flags. Vivian built her empire on water. Now I had the paper proving I could legally remove it. By the time opening day arrived, the floating restaurant looked like something dropped from another world. White canvas roofs, brass lanterns, Polished rails, rented flower boxes, and a red carpet laid across a dock Vivian did not own. A banner stretched over the ramp. Silver Pine Lake Dining. Grand opening. Under it, guests in suits and summer dresses stepped carefully onto the platform, smiling for a local news camera. The mayor was there. 2 county commissioners, investors I recognized from Grant Ellis's emails. Silver Pine residents clustered along the shore, whispering like they had come to watch history instead of trespass. Vivian stood at the entrance with a microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. She looked perfect. That was her gift. She could stand on stolen land and make it look like a ribbon cutting. Today, she announced, Silver Pine Ridge proves what responsible community leadership can unlock. I stood 50 yards away beside the old spillway wheel. Dana Whitfield was to my right, holding a folder with the 1934 contract, the county notice, the fraud filings, and the deed. Owen Bradley stood beside a county tripod, measuring staff and flow gauge. Sheriff Nolan Hayes leaned against his cruiser with his arms folded, watching the crowd instead of the water. Wade Turner had his hat low, eyes on the restaurant, one hand resting on the old concrete tower like he was greeting an old friend. Vivian saw us and kept talking. This project honors shared access, shared prosperity, and the future of modern lakefront living. Dana leaned toward me. She was served yesterday. She knows about the inspection. She thinks I won't do it with people watching. She still doesn't understand you filed it before she sent invitations. At 10:57, Owen checked his watch. Downstream channel is clear. Flow markers are set. Sheriff confirmed no one is inside the restricted spillway area. Nolan lifted 2 fingers from across the gravel. All clear. Vivian's microphone popped again. And now, I would like to thank the Silver Pine Board for standing firm against obstruction, fear, and outdated private claims. A few people clapped. Grant Ellis did not. He stood near the ramp with his arms tight across his chest, looking at the structure he had helped fund under a lie. When he saw me looking, he gave one short nod. At 11 o'clock exactly, Owen spoke into his radio. Morrison, correction, Mercer Property Flood Control Inspection, County File 1934-WC-17, Authorized Operator present. You may begin first gate test. I gripped the iron wheel. For a second, I felt my father's hand over mine from years ago, showing me how not to force old metal. Let it answer, he used to say. If it fights you, listen. The wheel resisted, then gave. A deep groan moved through the concrete tower. Not loud like a machine. Deeper. Older. Like the ranch itself had cleared its throat. Across the water, a few guests turned. The first release gate opened beneath the lake. Water pulled toward the culvert in a smooth, dark swirl. At the far edge of the restaurant, the platform shifted barely an inch. Vivian stopped mid-sentence, then recovered. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, forcing a laugh, you may hear some natural water movement. Perfectly normal for a living lake environment. Owen marked the first drop on his gauge. 6 inches. Dana wrote it down. The restaurant kept shining. So shone. Glasses still clinked. A waiter carried a tray of champagne past the microphone. But now every sound carried too far. At 11:08, the shoreline mud showed under the service ramp. At 11:11, one of the flower boxes slid sideways and tipped against the brass rail. At 11:14, a chef shouted from the kitchen barge, "Why is the deck moving?" The news camera turned from Vivian to the water. Vivian's smile vanished. She stepped off the platform and marched toward us, heels sinking slightly into the damp bank. "Caleb, what are you doing?" I did not move from the wheel. "Routine flood control inspection. This is my opening." "No," I said. "This is my lake." Owen looked at his gauge. Ready for second gate. Vivian's face tightened. If you touch that again, I will have you arrested. Sheriff Nolan Hayes stepped away from his cruiser. Mrs. Cross, the inspection is authorized by the county. This is an HOA development site. Nolan's voice stayed calm. Then you'll need to show me the deed, lease, easement, or court order giving you that authority. The microphone on Vivian's dress was still live. Everyone heard the silence. I turned the second wheel. This time the groan rolled across the lake, and the water began moving fast enough for the guests to understand. The restaurant dipped toward the west. Champagne slid off a table and shattered against the deck. Someone screamed Vivian's name, and for the first time all morning, the people celebrating on my lake started looking down. The second gate pulled the lake harder than the first. Water ran toward the spillway with a steady force, not wild, not dangerous, just certain. The floating restaurant lost its pretty balance inch by inch. A brass lantern swung loose and knocked against a post. Plates slid across white tablecloths. A cart loaded with silverware rolled until a waiter caught it with both hands. The red carpet on the ramp wrinkled as the platform sank lower, showing dark mud beneath the edge. Vivian ran back toward the restaurant, waving both arms. "Everyone stay calm," she shouted. "This is temporary. This is interference by one hostile landowner." Her microphone was still live. Her voice cracked across the speakers and came back thin over the water. A county commissioner stepped off the platform, shoes sinking into the wet bank. "Vivian, where is the permit package? It's filed. With whose authorization?" She looked at me. "The HOA's." Sheriff Nolan Hayes walked to the ramp and held up one hand to stop more people from boarding. "Nobody else gets on that structure." Vivian spun on him. "You have no authority to shut down an HOA amenity." Nolan's face did not move. "Mrs. Cross, I'm preventing guests from standing on an unstable platform sitting on disputed private property. That is exactly my authority." The news crew kept filming. That was when Dana stepped forward with the folder. "Sheriff," she said, "for the record, here is Caleb Mercer's recorded deed, the 1934 water control contract, the county inspection notice, and the fraud complaint filed after Mr. Mercer's signature was forged on the construction access agreement." The word forged moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Grant Ellis pushed through from the far side of the ramp. His face was tight, but his voice carried. "I can confirm that," he said. "Vivian Cross told my investment group Mr. Mercer had signed a lease. He had not. She collected deposits using false documents." Vivian pointed at him. "Grant, you are confused and emotional because this delay affects your return." "No," Grant said, holding up his phone. "I'm angry because you sent me this." He played the email aloud. "Owner signature secured. Construction access cleared. Proceed before opposition organizes." People turned toward Vivian. She reached for the phone, but Nolan stepped between them. "Don't touch his evidence." The restaurant dipped again. This time the kitchen side settled with a heavy grinding sound. Mud rose around the pontoons. Champagne bottles rolled under tables. A woman in a blue dress stumbled and was helped down the ramp by Deputy Clark. Vivian's face was no longer polished. It was raw panic under makeup. "This is sabotage," she shouted at the cameras. "He is destroying community property out of spite." I finally walked toward the ramp, stopping beside Dana. "Show them the deed," I said. Dana held the first page high enough for the camera to catch the county stamp. Mercer Lake, lake bed, dam, shoreline, and adjoining inspection zones are recorded under Caleb Mercer's parcel. Silver Pine Ridge HOA is not named in this deed. Nolan turned to Vivian. "Do you have a deed?" She said nothing. "Lease?" "Nothing." "Recorded easement?" Her lips parted. but no words came. That silence did more damage than shouting ever could. Then Marcia Bell stepped out from the crowd. I had seen her at HOA meetings, always quiet, always seated near the back with a folder in her lap. Today, her hands shook, but she kept walking until she stood beside the sheriff. "I'm Silver Pine Ridge treasurer," she said, "and I have bank records." Vivian stared at her like she had been betrayed by furniture. Marcia opened her folder. HOA emergency reserve funds were transferred to Lakeshore Community Ventures in 4 payments. That company is registered to Vivian Cross. There was no board vote approving those transfers. The crowd changed after that. It was not confusion anymore. It was anger. A man shouted, "You used our dues?" Another yelled, "My assessment went up for this?" Vivian backed away from Marcia, then from Nolan, then toward the sinking restaurant that had already settled too far to pretend it was floating. Grant handed Dana a printed copy of the forged lease. Marcia handed Nolan the bank records. Owen marked another water level drop and calmly logged the time. Everything Vivian had built was being documented in real time. The platform gave one final lurch and settled into the mud with a sound like a door closing. The banner over the ramp sagged. Silver Pine Lake Dining. Grand opening. Half the words were now splattered brown. Vivian looked at the restaurant, then at the sheriff, then at the cameras. For the first time since I had met her, she had no script. Nolan took the folder from Marcia and looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Cross, I think you need to stop talking until your attorney is present." She whispered, "This isn't over." I looked at the mud swallowing the brass rails. "No," I said. "Now it finally starts." It took 3 days for the floating restaurant to be removed and 3 months for the legal dust to settle. The removal crew came under a court order, not an HOA work permit. That mattered. Every cable they cut, every brass rail they hauled away, every warped deckboard lifted from the mud was logged by the county, photographed by Dana, and watched by Sheriff Nolan Hayes from the shoreline. Vivian Cross did not attend. Her attorney had advised her, finally, to stop standing near cameras. The lake stayed low until Owen Bradley completed the inspection. The old spillway worked clean. The culverts were clear. The dam face held. My grandfather's system, ignored by everybody except my family for nearly a century, passed every test the county could throw at it. Owen signed the final inspection report with a grin he tried to hide. "Your father maintained this better than half the modern systems I inspect." "He believed water remembers neglect," I said. "So does paper," Dana added, tapping the binder under her arm. That binder became the center of everything that followed. Vivian's fake notices, the development listing, the forged consent agreement, Grant Ellis's emails, Marcia Bell's bank records, the inspection notice, the 1934 water control contract, the recorded deed. Piece by piece, the story she had built came apart because every lie had a date on it. In court, Vivian's attorney tried to argue community reliance. He said Silver Pine residents had been led to believe Mercer Lake was a shared amenity. The judge looked over his glasses and asked one question. Led to believe by whom? The room went silent. Dana stood and answered with one word. Vivian. The ruling was clean. Mercer Lake, the lake bed, dam, spillway, shoreline, and inspection zones belonged to me. Silver Pine Ridge. HOA had no deeded interest, no valid easement, no lease, no construction authority, and no claim created by repetition, marketing, or wishful thinking. The old access clause Vivian waved around applied only to emergency livestock watering under conditions that had not existed for decades. The judge ordered the HOA to pay removal costs and damages to my property. Vivian was charged separately with forgery, fraud, embezzlement, and criminal trespass. Grant's investment group filed its own case. Marcia turned over enough financial records to trigger a full audit of Silver Pine Ridge. That audit finished what the mud started. Residents learned their dues had been moved into Lakeshore Community Ventures, Vivian's private company. Reserve funds meant for road repair, snow removal, and emergency maintenance had been spent on restaurant deposits, promotional materials, and legal letters designed to scare me off my own land. The HOA board collapsed within a week. Vivian resigned before they could remove her, but it made no difference. By then, the county had her statements, her bank transfers, her forged papers, and her voice on camera calling stolen water community progress. Some Silver Pine residents came to apologize. Some came angry at me, still wanting somebody else to blame. Most stayed away, which was fine. I had not done any of this to be liked. Wade Turner helped me rebuild the section of bank the construction crews damaged. Grant Ellis paid for new fencing near the south pasture before his lawyer even asked him to. Marcia Bell brought copies of every HOA ledger she could legally release, then stood on my porch with tears in her eyes. "I should have spoken sooner," she said. I looked out toward the lake, already filling again from the springs. "A lot of people should have." She nodded. "I know." By fall, the water had returned to its proper line. The mud disappeared beneath the surface. Trout came back to the shallows. The cottonwood over Emily's garden dropped gold leaves onto the stones, and for the first time in months, there were no survey flags in the dirt. Dana helped me place the lake under a private conservation agreement. Not public access. Not HOA access. Mine. Controlled. Protected. School groups could visit with written permission. Owen developed a small program about old dam systems and water stewardship. Wade told the kids stories about my father opening the spillway when he was young. The salvaged wood from Vivian's restaurant did not go back on the water. I used some of it to build a simple shelter near the old concrete tower. No brass, no chandeliers, just shade, benches, and a sign with my grandfather's name, my father's name, and Emily's. One evening, months after the court order, I sat alone on the dock. The lake moved softly against the posts. No generators, no microphones, no champagne glasses, no voice telling me grief was an obstacle to progress. Just water, cottonwood leaves, and the kind of quiet a man has to fight for once in his life. I looked toward Emily's garden and finally said the words I had been holding since the morning Vivian smiled from that floating deck. I kept my promise. The lake was not stolen, not sold, not conquered. And justice, I learned, does not always roar. Sometimes it sounds like water returning to peace.
What this story tells me is simple. When someone tries to rush you, stamp you, or bury you under official-looking paper, slow down and read the real paper. The deed matter, the on-dam contract matter, the dates, the notice, the photos, the quiet record on my kitchen table. All of it matter. I did not have to be louder than Vivian's. I just had to be steadier than the line. There is dignity in standing your ground the right way, not with breath, not with rage, with patience, cheers, and the kind of records that do not bend just because somebody with a title wants them to. Land is not just dirt and water. Sometimes it is memory. Sometimes it's a family. Sometimes it is the last promise a man made to someone he loved. So let me ask you this. If somebody tried to claim what your family worked for, would you stand quiet and build a case, or would you confront them right away? Comment 0 if you would stay calm and document everything. Comment 1 if you would speak up the moment they cross the line. And if stories like this remind you that ordinary people still have a right to protect what is there, go ahead and subscribe. There are more HOA, range, leg, and less story coming. Stories about dignity, patience, and the quiet courage it takes to haunt your route.